Before I start, Rick, what I'd like to do is just kind of to say an amen to your resolution about constitutionally limited government. Unfortunately, most people in Washington have no clue what the Constitution is all about. In Hosea 4:6, God says, "My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge." And I encourage you to support that resolution and hold all of us in federal government, as well as state government, accountable. It's absolutely critical that you do so. But Barack Obama and Nancy Pelosi talk about constitutional government, Rick. Now, they're not looking at the Constitution that I look at. I carry a copy in my pocket. But not only read the Constitution, encourage your family, your friends, your children, your grandchildren to read the Constitution, but read what our Founding Fathers said about it. Because the Constitution is not, never was intended to be a living, breathing document.
All right.
Just think about it. If we don't have a solid foundation upon which to build our society and all of law, as the Constitution is supposed to be, then we are building our society on shifting sands. And that will lead to tyranny. And to prevent that is up to you. And that's the reason, Rick, that this resolution is so critically important. I applaud what you're doing, and I encourage all of you to support the resolution. But not only support the resolution, but become familiar with what our Founding Fathers meant for government to be. And that's enumerated powers, very limited government, particularly on the federal side. So thank you, Rick, for what y'all do. Thank you. Now, not that. Friends, government has become too big, too intrusive, too burdensome. Government is out of control. It spends too much. It taxes too much. It regulates too much. It borrows too much. It sticks its nose in our business too much, and it must stop. Both parties are guilty. Former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mike Mullen, while he was in that position, made a statement. He said, "The greatest security threat we face as a nation is our debt." We've got a debt of almost $17 trillion. I agree completely with Admiral Mullen. And the reason that is such a huge security threat is because if we don't do something about stopping this out-of-control government, out-of-control spending, the U.S. military is not going to have the resources that it needs to protect us. I'm in the military today. I'm a U.S. Navy reservist. I'm a U.S. Marine, actually, in a sailor's uniform now.
Always be a sailor, don't say that. Don't say that.
This is a little Marine Navy type of discussion. They always say that the Marine Corps is the Department of the Navy, but yes, we're the men's Department of the Navy. This sequester that we're under right now is cutting our military into muscle and bone. I got back in the Navy 3 years ago because I am a Marine, we're fighting, and I was actually deployed to Afghanistan last year. I was there not as a member of the U.S. Congress, I was there as a lieutenant commander, a medical doctor in what's called RC Southwest. I was at Camp Leatherneck taking care of sick and injured Marines and soldiers. Our out-of-control government and out-of-control spending, and this sequester, which, by the way, I did not vote for, because I thought it was terrible policy. is actually degrading the capability of our military today. You may have seen just 3 weeks ago, I think it was, we saw where 1 of 3 of the missile units that deliver the nuclear warheads in the U.S. Air Force, there are 3 of them. 1 of them just failed its readiness and safety inspection. This is the 2nd of the 3. This out-of-control government is threatening our national security. Today, I'm an original intent constitutionalist. I believe in limited government. I believe in the enumerated powers. When I was elected to Congress 6 years ago, I pledged the people in the 10th Congressional District that there would be 4 questions that I applied to all pieces of legislation. And I've upheld that promise. The first, is it right? Does it fit the Judeo-Christian biblical principles that our nation was founded upon? The second, is it constitutional according to the original intent? Third, do we need it? Fourth, can we afford it? If all 4 yes, I'll vote yes. If one's no, I'll vote no. And I'll pledge to you today, that's exactly how I'll vote as your U.S. Senator. And as an original intent constitutionalist, I'm the only candidate in this race that truly believes in the Constitution as our founding fathers meant it to be. Now, government is out of control and it is spending too much. I've offered more targeted spending cuts than any other member of Congress. Just in the last Congress, I offered over $155 billion, supported over $155 billion worth of targeted cuts. That's almost twice what the sequester is, that you hear everybody having so much heartburn about. Now let me give you some examples of the kind of spending cuts that I propose. Right now today we're spending almost $70 billion on the U.S. Department of Education. The average salary of those fat cat bureaucrats that have never taught a child to read is over $101,000 a year. I say, let's close down the Department of Education totally. Let's leave those dollars here in Georgia. Let's pay our teachers more.
Yeah.
Let's get the government shackles off the teachers. And in fact, George W. Bush gave us no child left behind. I call it no teacher left unshackled. Let's get those shackles off our teachers so we can have a world-class education system right here in Georgia. That's what we should do. While we're closing down things, let's close down the EPA office. Got to be good stewards of our environment, there's no question. But this EPA is already killing jobs, it's ruining our economy, it's driving up the cost of all energy. Our president said his policies, to quote him, will necessarily skyrocket the cost of energy. Who's most affected by that? Poor people and senior citizens on limited income. It's not fair. Let's get rid of the EPA. And while we're closing down things, let's close down the IRS office. I'm a strong supporter of a national retail sales tax, the fair tax, and I'll continue to support it. We've got to get a handle on the government. We've got to shrink it. We need to send powers back to the states or the people as the 10th Amendment says it should be. These two guys should have actually more political power than we do in Washington, D.C. And that's what I've been doing ever since I've been in Congress. I've been fighting my own leadership. I've been fighting this out-of-control government. I've been standing firm on those 4 questions. because I have voted that way, the Club for Growth has rated me the #1 member of the entire U.S. House of Representatives as a defender of economic freedom. I've been endorsed by my good friend and former colleague, Dr. Ron Paul, because I'm an original intent constitutionalist. I've been endorsed by the Gun Owners of America and the National Association of Gun Rights, and just yesterday by the Georgia Gun Owners, because I'm the champion of Second Amendment rights and the chairman of the Second Amendment Task Force in the U.S. House. And John, coming back to one of the questions that you asked, Tricia, I've been trying to get Beretta and Colt to move to Georgia.
Good.
And we'll continue to do so. But let me tell y'all what I've been doing too in that capacity while I've been working with them. Anytime I meet with a company representative in Washington about a political issue, I start talking to them about moving a plant or moving their company to Georgia. In November of 2011, I met with 2 individuals of an international company. And after talking about whatever the political issue was, I said, why don't y'all move your whole organization? Y'all in Illinois. The weather's awful up there. You have to deal with unions. Real estate and energy and water are all extremely expensive. Why don't y'all just move the whole kit and caboodle to Georgia? And the guy said, that I was talking to me, guy said, I don't know about moving the whole thing, but we're thinking about moving a plant from Japan back to the United States.
Good.
And so I put on my salesman's hat. I'm a small businessman. I grew up in retail sales. And started telling him why they should move to Georgia. And I finished the conversation and said to him, if you'll give me the name of the decision maker in y'all's company who's going to be making these decisions, could I have our governor call them? And he said, well, I guess so. I walked out of that meeting, pulled out my cell phone. I called the governor on his cell phone. I said, Governor Deal, y'all need to talk to these people quick. This was November of 11. 4 months later, we broke ground for Caterpillar in Athens in Oconee County. Bravo! I've done the same thing with Beretta and Colt, and I'm working with other companies to try to bring those jobs here to Georgia.
Well, it was Michael Caldwell's idea, so I'll give him credit.
Well, that's right.
But I tried to push it.
We're good. But that's some of the things that I have been doing to answer some of the questions that y'all had earlier. But y'all, I'm a father of 2, a grandfather of 2, a father of 3. I'm the husband of my wife, Nikki Brown, who's with us here today for the, there's my wife right there. I've been her husband for the last 28 years, and I'm fighting for their future. I'm fighting for freedom and liberty for all of our children and grandchildren. That's what this Senate race is about for me. It's about the future of our nation. It's not about a title. It's not about a political position, except for the fact that one U.S. Senator standing firm on principle can be much more effective in how legislation's handled and how policies develop than one doing so in the U.S. House. I'm leaving a very, very safe seat in the House in the 10th Congressional District. But you see, our country is facing a very perilous future if we don't stop this out-of-control government. So I'm fighting for your children. I'm fighting for your grandchildren's future. Because this spending has to stop. This out-of-control government has to stop. I need your vote. I need your help and support. Most of all, I need your prayers. And with your prayers, and by God's grace, this is a race that we will win. And together, we will restore constitutional limited government, and we'll restore liberty and freedom for our children and our grandchildren. Thank y'all so much. God bless.
And I know we usually have a very shy group, so are there any questions?
Yes, ma'am.
Can you elaborate on your energy policy?
Yes, absolutely. We must develop our God-given energy resources all across this country. All of our energy resources. In fact, I've got a bill that I call One Bite of the Apple to stop these radical environmental groups from stopping energy development. And it forces them to only have one bite of the apple in the legal system. We've got to drill for oil. We've got to drill for natural gas. We've got to develop all of our energy resources. We've got to get the regulatory burden as well as the court burdens off of our energy developers here in this country. We must have clean coal technology. We must have it all. I'm a strong supporter of nuclear energy. We have to have an all-of-the-above energy policy. Yes, ma'am.
Could you talk about your immigration position?
Sure. The immigration position, first thing is, and until we secure the border, nothing else matters. There's only one new law that we need right now today. One. And that's to make English the official language of America. Start enforcing the laws that are on the books. We've had 4 presidents, 2 Republicans, 2 Bushes, Clinton and now Obama, who've not wanted to secure the border, who've not enforced the law. Both party presidents are selectively enforcing the law. We must be a nation under the rule of law, where everybody is treated equal under the law, equally under the law, without a question. And that's what we must start doing. Until we secure the border, nothing else matters. And just before we had our August district work period break, I introduced a House resolution that says, with all immigration reform, no matter what it is, no amnesty for anybody. Yes, sir.
Dr. Brown, thank you for coming. I wanted to ask you a question about the U.S. Senate overall, not just the race in Georgia.
Right.
I believe Georgia, we have to make sure, whatever it takes, to make sure Georgia stays a red state.
It will.
Absolutely.
It will.
But the #1 enemy of freedom, I believe, in this country is Obama. Second is Harry Reid. What is it going to take to get rid of Harry Reid and take over the U.S. Senate?
John, you're exactly right. First thing, let me talk about Georgia, because the establishment don't want me to go to the U.S. Senate. And the reason for that is when I go to the Senate, it'll be Ted Cruz, Rand Paul, Mike Lee, and Paul Brown. The establishment don't want that. I've already worked with those 3 guys very closely. In fact, I started the process that brought Judy to Washington for this big Tea Party group that we had up there on the 10th to defund Obamacare. So I'm already working with those guys. And what you'll hear here in Georgia is people will say, we've got to be careful of who we nominate, or a Democrat might win this race. Well, a Democrat's not going to win in Georgia this cycle because of the political environment and the dynamics of this race. A Democrat cannot win. And Michelle Nunn certainly is not going to win. Who wants more of a community organizer? That's what we've got enough of this. All right. Well, Republicans going to win in Georgia, and the question is, do you want an establishment Republican, or do you want somebody who's fighting to stop this out-of-control government and out-of-control spending? And that's really the whole question that you're going to have to face. Because I'm the only candidate in this race who has a record of fighting this out-of-control government. Y'all asked Tricia about some things, what she would do, and God bless her, I love her. She and I have been friends for a long, long time. But she can't tell you what she's done because she's not been there. She can tell you what she's been doing here to fight for wherever she's been, and all the other candidates are the same way. But in this Senate race, I'm the only candidate who's been in the trenches fighting fighting this out of control government, out of control spending. So Georgia's going to stay a Republican U.S. Senate seat. And to answer you about nationwide, we have a great chance of winning control of the U.S. Senate in this year's election. We've got more senators that are up on the Democrat side that are vulnerable. So hopefully, Harry Reid will no longer be the majority leader in the U.S. Senate. Yes, sir. My sailor buddy.
There you go.
Thanks for your service.
What is your thoughts on term limits for elected officials?
With term limits, if I thought that they would solve things, I would embrace it, but they won't. We've already got term limits for state house and state senate seats in California and Montana. And what it's done in both of those states is it's empowered the bureaucrats. And it's really not helped. The problem is not that we have unlimited terms, but that we have unlimited government, and we must go back to constitutionally limited government. And in fact, if we were following the Constitution today the way that our founding fathers envisioned it to be, I'd be practicing medicine full-time in Georgia and going to Washington just every now and then to vote to make sure we have a strong national defense. Make sure our sailors and Marines and soldiers and airmen and Coast Guard all have the resources that they need. Make sure that our foreign affairs are in the best interest of this nation. And voting on only those 18 things that Article 1, Section 8 gives us the authority to vote on. Starts right there and goes to right there. It's 1 3/4 pages. It's only 18 things that are the enumerated powers. We've got to go back to this document as our founding fathers meant for it to be. And I'll pledge to you I'll continue to fight for constitutional limited government as your U.S. Senator. Judy.
I believe one of the big drivers for the illegal aliens coming over are the government programs.
Right.
That they teach each other, come over, you know, we'll sign you up, they give rebates for the taxes for kids that are still in Mexico. That's not checked out.
You're exactly right. You and I had a little discussion beforehand about that very issue, and we have all the federal largesse going to these illegal aliens. Again, until we close the border, nothing else matters. We've got to stop this. We've got a mess with the whole immigration system across the board. But until we secure the border, start enforcing the law, and that's one of those things. In fact, let me tell y'all, when I got to Congress 6 years ago, a little over 6 years ago, I started and others of us started trying to put in verification for these issues like you're talking about. She's talking about this child tax credit where money's going to kids, lots of them, at one address where no children live. Or maybe 1 or 2 children live, and they'll have in the teens numbers of kids that are getting checks or
$4 billion.
right. She said over $4 billion a year, and it's exactly right. But the thing, what we fought for is verification. Again, upholding the law. And what Nancy Pelosi, we tried to do this and strongly when Pelosi was Speaker, which she was there when in the Speaker's chair when I got to Congress. What they've put in place is what's called self-verification. They ask them, are you here legally? We see, or whatever the name, whatever the word is, and they say, here's your check. And we've got to start enforcing the law. It's against the law today for these people to be getting your money. And we've had 4 presidents who have refused to enforce the law. And that's what I will continue to do as long as I'm in the House, and I will continue to do it as your U.S. Senator. Sir. Yes, ma'am.
To piggyback on that, so you're talking about illegal immigrants. My experience has been not only the borders, but people come here on legal visas, vacation visas, and just stay. And my husband even had experience with, he was in construction. He had a man from France who was here illegally, might have been in trouble with the law, and we called ICE and they said, just don't hire him. You know, and the number of illegals working in restaurants who use fake Social Security cards, so borders are good, but I still feel like we need more, I guess, ICE doesn't have any teeth, you know, they're not really cracking down, so I hear borders, but we have one of the largest Brazilian populations, they're not necessarily coming through Mexico, they're coming through Hartsville, Jackson. So I just, for me, I'd like to hear more, borders are good, but just more teeth and ice.
Well, again, let me give you some data. 40% of illegal aliens, they tell us, 40% actually came here legally. 40%.
I can believe it.
So, securing the border is not the whole answer to the question, because it's a very complex situation. But if we start enforcing the law, that will stop the problem. And in fact, when Ronald Reagan signed the amnesty bill in 1986, where he gave amnesty to almost 2.7 million illegal aliens in this country, part of that bill was that the border would be secured and that the laws would be enforced. But again, we've had 4 presidents, both Bushes, Clinton, and now Obama, who've refused to enforce the law. And the problem that you're talking about is exactly correct. And I'll give you a story about a piece of legislation I introduced. It's called the Improve E-Verify Act. And I got this idea from one of my constituents, actually from Tommy Dudley. Any Georgia Bulldogs in here? The Hedges actually came from Tommy and his brother, who have Dudley Nursery down in Thompson, Georgia. And I was in talking to the human resources lady who runs their company, and she, as well as Tommy and Mike Dudley, have told me they don't hire illegal aliens in their nursery, which is actually very unusual. Most nurseries have a lot of illegal aliens working in their company. And I asked this lady, how did she prevent illegal aliens from coming? She said, I just pick up the telephone and I call Social Security and compare the name to the Social Security number. Now, there could be a whole lot of Juan Valdez or there could be or Garcias or whatever, I don't know. But anyway, the thing is, we've got a system that's actually a pilot program called E-Verify. Right now, it's voluntary. And I'm not for mandating anything to business, so I want it to stay voluntary. So what I did is I wrote an E-Verify bill. What E-Verify does today is an employer who signs up can go online and check the name versus the Social Security number. That's all it does. But it may take several weeks for them to get the results back. The current pilot program says if you hire somebody, you go ahead and run them through the E-Verify system, and you hire them and you start the training program, you can't fire them if they're illegal.
How good is that?
It's nuts. It's absolutely true. And then, not only that, you can't go back and check, if you sign up, you can't go back and check people who are already hired by the business. So you cannot check pre-employment. You got to hire them, and then you can't fire them. And you can't fire other people if you find out that they're illegal. So what I wrote is a bill called Improve E-Verify that would continue to make it voluntary. Because it's up to the federal government to enforce the laws, the immigration laws, not a businessman or woman. So it still is voluntary, but what you can do is utilize it pre-employment. Plus, when you sign up, you can check everybody in your employment at the time. And you can fire them just if they don't match.
Well,
Let me go for it.
One of the guys I used to work with,
Yeah.
he bought a Social Security. He is here legally from Mexico, and he bought a Social Security number, and he's like, oh, and it's a good one.
Well, they all have documents.
Right, but I'm saying he's like, and it's it's a good number. He actually purchased
Yeah.
somebody.
Well, the thing is, we've got to give the employers the tools. And the other thing that my bill does is it says, if you sign up, if you check somebody and you do it the way you're supposed to, then it gives you immunity from prosecution once we start putting the law in place or start enforcing the law. So that's the kind of legislation that I've been proposing.
This was a large corporation that he worked for,
Yeah.
too.
That's right. But we've got to start enforcing the law.
Yeah.
Yeah.
First off, I'm an Army veteran. We cleared the ground for you guys. But
You're back of us. You just,
I'm 100% constitutional. My question is, how can any congressman, senator, state representative, city representative, anybody in government think that Putin or anybody else from the Soviet Union, whether they've got KBG experience or not, can represent the United States? And how can our country's name and credibility, as far as I'm concerned, our credibility in the world was just washed into a garbage can, and our sovereignty as a nation has been thrown in a garbage can? How can that happen, and how can our representatives let that happen?
well, obviously you're talking about what's going on with the Syrian
Syrians and the
issue, and I came out in fact, on Saturday, when the president made his little speech, I immediately that day we put out a press release that I'm absolutely no on our getting engaged in Syria. We should never engage ourselves in any war unless, number one, Congress declares war. We have not done that since World War II. In fact, my balanced budget amendment, which is actually the best one in Congress, would only allow breaking a balanced budget in the case of a national emergency of declared war. And that's the only way we would not have a balanced budget with my balanced budget amendment. When we get it passed in law, hopefully we will get that eventually done. But the thing is, we've had a lot of presidents of both parties who've looked to the international community for direction for the United States, and I'm totally against that. In fact, the very first day of this Congress, I introduced 5 bills within a matter of just a few minutes after being sworn in to this Congress. The first one was my Sanctity of Human Life Act that defines life beginning at fertilization. The second bill I introduced is one that my good friend Ron Paul had, to audit the Fed. The third bill I introduced is one to get rid of the Fed altogether. And the fourth one was get rid of this fiat money and go back to the gold standard. And the fifth bill I introduced, all within minutes, was to get the U.S. out of the UN. I want to get the UN out of the UN. All of our foreign policies should be based on what's good for America.
Yes.
We've got to have peace through strength, which means building up our military instead of tearing it down. Our military capability has been steadily degraded in the personnel and the capability. We've got the best military right now today ever in the history of this nation. But we're not paying our troops enough. We're not giving them the what we call in the Marine Corps dwell time, those that have been back and forth from theater enough time. It's not fair for their family. We've got to have a strong military. And that's where we should be spending money instead of on a lot of the other things, such as the Department of Education and EPA and other, Department of Labor, Department of Commerce, Department of Energy. I want to get rid of all those things and devolve those powers back to the states and the people as they should be. But we need to focus on what's good for America. And let me tell you this too, while I'm talking about foreign affairs. We should never ever give one dime to a country where they're burning the American flag and saying death to America. One last question? Judy. Oh, you got it. Save the chairman-elect.
Since we've got the employers having to use E-Verify,
Yep.
why can't we have the unemployment office using E-Verify? Because my girlfriend worked down there and they were told not to question the papers, and they look at them and no, they're not going to.
Well, E-Verify currently is still voluntary for the employers. Now, we have Republicans who want to mandate that, and I cannot vote for it because it's not constitutional to mandate that on the employer. It's up to the federal government to enforce and give the tools to the employers that they need to enforce the law, just not hire somebody. But it's already in the law, Judy, that the unemployment office and the welfare office and all these other places are supposed to verify the status of anybody who walks in. And they're just not enforcing the law, and that's the problem.
They've been told not to.
Well, I know, and 4 presidents have done so. It's not just Democrats, but it's 4 presidents have done so. Rick?
So we've all heard recently that, you know, the government is, for all intents and purposes, broke. If we took every dollar and every dime that we made in this country as a nation and applied it towards our deficit, or to our debt rather, we would still be broke. So the question I have for you is, we hear all the time about the debt ceiling and people voting to raise the debt ceiling or wanting to raise the debt ceiling. There's a discussion going on right now about tying the defunding of Obamacare to the debt ceiling discussion and a few other things to this debt ceiling discussion. My concern is, as we continue to raise this debt ceiling, nobody is addressing the fact that we haven't had a budget for over 4 years. And as a senator, how would you address that with people like Harry Reid and Nancy Pelosi who refuse to bring a budget up for discussion on the floor?
Well, hopefully Harry Reid's not going to be the majority leader in the U.S. Senate when I get there in January of 2015. But the Senate hasn't even tried until recently to do a budget at all. Nancy Pelosi essentially didn't do so. In the House, we had 2 budgets that, since the Republicans took over the control of the House, we've had the Ryan budget, and we've had also the Republican Study Committee budget. Now, the Ryan budget that we had, I didn't vote for it. I couldn't vote for it because it was not factual. Paul Ryan today, and most Republicans today, are saying that the Ryan budget would balance in 10 years. But the assumptions that they had in the budget are just totally false. They were assuming, I think it's a 3.3% growth rate this year. Y'all think our economy's going to grow 3.3%? And every out year beyond that it doesn't make that, the deficit continues to escalate exponentially. He said that it would repeal Obamacare. It doesn't repeal anything. It just assumes Obamacare is repealed and doesn't go into place. But it keeps the taxes in place that Obamacare has given all of us. That's not fair. It's not right. So it's a ruse. We've got to stop playing games with American people. And Rick, you're exactly right. We've got to. That's the reason I've got the strongest balanced budget amendment in the Constitution that is in Congress. Everybody else says, well, I support a balanced budget. Well, where's theirs? You can see mine. I support cutting spending. Where have they done so? You can see mine. I support repealing Obamacare. My Patient Option Act, 77 pages, will rip Obamacare out by the roots and would replace it with policy that's going to make your health insurance less expensive. In fact, it'll make all Americans' health insurance less expensive. My Patient Option Act will provide good quality health care access to all Americans. And it's going to save Medicare from going broke. That's the kind of policy that I've promoted and will continue to promote. And 77 pages, Tricia, you can read it before we'd ever vote on it. Once it comes to the floor, if you're there, or Bob Barr, or Barry Loudermilk, you read it. And you can and you can understand it too. So without any questions, we've got to live within our means. I've never voted for a stimulus package. I've never voted for a bailout. I've never requested an earmark. I've never voted to increase taxes. In fact, I believe if 10% is good enough for the Lord, it ought to be good enough on the planet. But we've got to shrink the size and scope of government to get there. We've got to send those powers back to the states or to the people as it should be. And we've got to live within our means. You're exactly right. And I'll do everything I can to make sure. And by the way, I've never voted to raise the debt ceiling either. So we've got to live within our means. You're exactly right. We shouldn't raise taxes. We need to be raising taxpayers. And we do that. Tricia had a question. I've heard Barry have a question about how they're going to stimulate jobs. I've got my Jobs Act, Barry, that would bring millions of new jobs here to this country. Millions. Art Laffer, the famous economist that worked with Ronald Reagan, I was talking to him about my Jobs Act, and he said, Paul, there's no economic model to even guess how big your bill would be in stimulating our economy. I've got the record. I've got the will to say no to our leadership, to a president.
That's good.
That's what I've been doing. I have been one no vote out of the whole of the U.S. House several times because it doesn't meet those 4 questions. I've been one no vote out of 2 or 3 numerous times, again, because it's not constitutional. When I was sworn into Congress, when I was sworn in the Marine Corps, when I was sworn in the Navy, I swore to uphold the Constitution against enemies, both foreign and domestic. Out of control. Out of control government, out of control spending. Larry did the same thing when he was sworn in the Army. Out of control government and out of control spending have become our nation's enemy. And I will not give up until we defeat those enemies. Thank y'all so much.